Well, several years ago, some buddies of mine and I decided to hike into the Grand Canyon. It takes a better part of a day to get down. Then we spent all day at the base, and then we hiked a day out. It was a lot of fun. But I remember when we did that, I had been reading up on it and found out that there was a waterfall 6 miles further into the canyon. So it's a bit of a haul, 6 miles in, 6 miles out. And so after we hiked down that next full days, I pitched a vision to my friends. Hey, what if we hiked 6 miles deeper in to see the waterfall and then back? And they said, no. They didn't want to do that, which I was a little frustrated by. So I wanted to see this waterfall. So I was a little mad about them and their lack of commitment to beautiful things. I was a little frustrated about this. And so I went to just kind of walk it off. And so as they sat there and did nothing with their lives, I was just journeying and decided, as I'm processing this with the Lord, I'm going to just process, towards the direction of this waterfall. So I'm praying about my friends and praying about their hearts, and then it just becomes praying about my life, and I'm praying about what God's doing in the world. It becomes this wonderful dialogue with the Lord. It was a beautiful day out, and we're just walking. As we do that, I'm like, dude, I'm gonna walk to this waterfall. I'm on my way, it's a gorgeous day, let's just keep moving. And so I continued to do that, and then after a while, it struck me, wait, I have no idea how long I've been walking. I didn't bring a watch, I didn't bring a phone. I can't see the sun, I'm in a canyon. I don't know how long it's been. It's been 1 mile, it's been 5. I don't know, how much further is this? And then it hits me, wait a minute, I didn't bring any water. I didn't bring any food either. Man, this could be a problem. How long till you dehydrate? And then I realized, but I don't want to give up and go back. I could be right there. So I'm like, I'm not sure what to do. And I started to get a little panicked about it. So I just decided, you know what? I'm just gonna walk faster. And I started to power walk through the canyon. And as I did that, I remember I'm zooming through this canyon, and then I see a couple out in front of me. And so I just come up on them quick, right? Because I'm moving. And as I do that, I show up and they're like, hey, they want to visit, and I'm trying to be nice. So I'm like, oh, hey. And they're like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm trying to get to this waterfall. And they're like, oh, we are too. Do you want to walk with us? And I remember instantly thinking, absolutely not. I'm on a move, folks. You are way too slow. You're not going to slow me down. I got things I got to do. And so I was just like, oh, thanks. No, I got some meetings later. See you later. And just took off, dusting. But I remember as I did that, they had said, oh, it's just around the corner. And so I start going, and I'm like, hey, I'm going. And then I realized, I don't know how long it's been. I don't know how late it is. It could become dark. I could be out here in the dark and not see anything. I could miss it. I don't know how long this is going to take. And so I realized, I don't want to be lost out here in the dark. This power walking is not sufficient. So I just start to run. And I'm sprinting through the canyon. And then I realized as I did that, I'm running for a while. And after I'm running for a while, I realized, wait a minute. They said it was just around the corner. What if I passed it? Then I'm just running into the unknown. Then I'm just some loser just disappearing into the wilderness. It's gonna take days to find the body. I was like, this is crazy, man. I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm freaking out. And so then I realized I lack perspective. I don't know where it is. I need higher ground. So I start climbing the side of the canyon, and I get up to try to get some perspective. But as I do that, I scare a deer. Or properly, we scare each other, because I turned this corner and he was munching on a branch, and he goes, ah, and I was like, ah! And so I startled and fell backwards, and as I did it, my hand got driven a thorn into it. And I remember it just drove into the meat, made my hand seize up. I start bleeding, and I'm like, my hand! And as I do that, I tumble and roll down the side of this canyon. So I get up, and I'm covered with dust and blood, and as I'm sitting there, my pain going, why, God? And suddenly, I hear the crash of a distant waterfall. Wait a second. So I get back up, and I make my way around the corner, and sure enough, right there, I look up, and cascading down from the top of the canyon is this gorgeous waterfall, filling up this lovely pool, on the banks of which there was a picnic. And it was the couple that I had passed earlier. They were already there. And I'll never forget, they looked at me, and they could not hide their shock. They were like, what happened to you? And as I stood there covered in dust and blood, there was no way to fake it. I'm like, oh, I ran into this pack of wild. And I was just like, I freaked out. I freaked out and made a mess. And gratefully, they were there to clean me up and bandage my wounds and feed me and give me water. And I learned a lot about humility and about the dangers of anxiety. What do I mean by that? Well, for many of us, anxiety is an engine. It'll get you moving. And for many of us, you've got where you wanted to go. That fear of not arriving at whatever arrival means to you. I got to get this certain number of followers. I got to get this certain kind of job. I got to make this certain kind of money. I have to achieve this certain amount of fame, notoriety, power by this age. That anxiety and fear has driven you, and maybe you even got to where you wanted to go, but you're getting pretty beat up along the way. And anxiety as a driver can sometimes be the most dangerous thing for us, and we got to learn how to deal with it. And it's fascinating in this passage, Peter's going to address the issue of anxiety, and he's going to do something interesting here. I don't know if you noticed it. He's connecting anxiety with arrogance and with humility. He says, humble yourselves, because God opposes the proud. But then he says, humble yourselves, casting your anxieties upon the Lord. That casting your anxieties is a participle. It participates in humble yourselves. Part of walking away from being arrogant is being humble enough to hand your anxiety over to the Lord. He's making some connections between arrogance and anxiety, and the remedy being humility. Now, let me specify as I say that, that doesn't mean if you struggle with anxiety, it's because you're an arrogant person. That's not really what, like the Apostle Paul will say at one point, I'm anxious for all the churches daily. There's some kinds of anxieties that aren't the fruit of arrogance. And look, in our culture today, we use the word anxiety for such a wide variety of experiences in humanity. And I'm not trying to maybe cover all of what you're experiencing, and I'm certainly not in any way trying to diminish some medical intervention and help for many of us that have found it useful. But what I am saying is Peter sees a connection in many of our circumstances between anxiety and arrogance. And he presents a remedy of humility, and we need to understand why. Right? Now, what's fascinating about this is great whats only happen because of great whys. And what I love about this passage is for every what he tells us to do, there's quickly a great why it matters. And so we're going to take this in kind of two parts. We'll look at this first chunk and the second of how we handle our anxiety, what we're meant to do, and why. So we'll start in verse 5b. He says, clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Now notice he says all of you, so for context, if you're just joining us, 1 Peter, he's been writing this to churches, and churches that are suffering particularly because of their faith, that their association with Jesus has resulted in alienation from the culture. They're weird, and it hurts. Not physically yet, but they're being ostracized emotionally, they're being insulted, it might have cost them socially and financially, and they're in a situation that is stressful, that they're feeling the pressure. And whenever you feel that kind of pressure, stress reveals fractures. If we had a submarine and it just had a hairline fracture in the hull, just a little one, it might be invisible to the human eye. But if you let that submarine continue to go down to the depths, as the pressure builds, what happens? A little hairline fracture becomes a fissure, and then it'll break open and it'll swamp the whole thing. And for many of us, we may have some little fractures in us, and it's pressure that begins to compromise it and make it a fissure that could sink the whole thing. And here he's talking about the church. And if you notice here, we didn't read it from the section before. He was talking to elders in the church, and he told elders not to be domineering over the young. And then we read the part about the young submit to the elders. What you're seeing there is he's saying, hey, our community is experiencing stress. It's experiencing some external factors that are stressful. And in doing that, as that stress gets on us, there's going to be a temptation for the leaders to become controlling. There's going to be a temptation for the younger among us to usurp and not trust the leaders and get out of the way. If this person wasn't in charge, I'd be in charge. If I was in charge, it would be better. That's something about our anxiety makes us want to get control. If I get control, it'd be better. And our anxiety becomes a demand for power. And in the midst of that, he's saying, hey, there's some fault lines breaking. And in this section, he definitely highlights the fault line between ages. Between old and young, there can be a fissure within the community. You see this in sports teams all the time. If you got a team that's losing because they're being beat by external forces, it will open up some rifts within the team. Well, this coach is an idiot. Well, that guy's not committed. Well, that person's arrogant. Well, this person's not showing up on time. And if we continue in tearing each other apart, not only will we not be successful, we'll continue to be dominated by outside forces. It's not till the team sees where the cracks are and heals them, they can move forward successfully. This is the plot of the entire first Avengers movie. Right? External forces reveal fault lines in us. Stress shows fracture. And if we can heal those fractures, we can move forward successfully. So here Peter is talking to them and saying, hey, you're in the midst of anxiety, but in the midst of that anxiety, I want you to bring humility to the table, a willingness to put your needs down and serve someone else's needs. Not try to push your agenda, but see what other people need to succeed and push that agenda, because your anxiety has become a threat to unity and to productivity. So he says, clothe yourselves with humility. I love to clothe yourselves. It shows up a lot in the Bible, clothe yourselves, like put on the armor of light, put on the Lord Jesus Christ, put on compassion. Here, he uses the word put on that means to wrap around. Wrap humility around yourself. The willingness to serve others and not try to push your own agenda. He said, I want you to just cover yourself in that, like a towel or a blanket or a robe or a shawl or a sarong. Just wrap yourself in humbling yourself to other people. Why would I do that? Why would anyone in DC do that? Like, Ben, that's not how this works. Well, it says, because God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. We used to quote this a lot in the early days of our church, because we experienced a lot of success early, and when you experience success, you can get arrogant. And I would warn our team, hey, if we're arrogant, if we look and say, look what my hands have wrought, if we have that kind of attitude, God says not only will he not bless us, he says he will come around the other end and oppose us. I said, and I don't want to lead a church like that. A church that God opposes, bad life choice. So we will not be proud, we'll be humble people, because God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Fear seems to seek control. Some of you experience this. If you're riding with someone in the car and you're not sure they know where they're going, that fear manifests how? You go, hey man, have you ever been there before? Hey, what app do you use? Hey, I'm gonna pull up on my app. Actually, I pulled up 3 different apps and they're all showing that a different way would be a better way. What is that? Fear becomes control, right? And here in this moment, you see anxiety becoming control, but that pride, man, is dangerous for us because it betrays a mentality, if I was running things, it would go better. And the reality is that's not always the case in our life, right? That God, when we say to God, hey, I don't like the circumstances in my life. If I was running them, they'd be better. We're telling God, move over, let me drive. Not a great strategy, not a great plan. Because for many of us, the desire to be exalted, that's the thing he's worried about, that God will lift you up at a certain amount of time. Some of us say, hey, I'm not getting exalted quick enough at my office, in the sphere, in my friendship group. I'm not getting to the heights I want to get to, so I need to grab control. I need to drive. Sometimes, often, that's a selfish motivation that God can't bless because you don't have other people in mind. When I ran Breakaway, a college ministry, there was a season where we didn't have a worship leader, and so I was having different friends come in and guest worship lead. But it was a large ministry, multiple thousands of people, and so we just got inundated with requests to lead worship. And I remember people would request, and we would talk to many of them. Some of them had the skill and talent, but lived too far away. Others of them just weren't maybe developed enough to lead in that environment. But there was a handful that would come to us that would demand to be on stage. And I remember one of them coming up to my wife and saying, what's it gonna take for your husband to put me on that stage? And she was like, well, hey, there's a board of directors, we make those decisions, but Ben is the head of that. And as soon as she said Ben is the head, before she could finish the sentence, this person went, well, the neck moves the head, talking to my wife. And my wife was like, okay, God is not gonna elevate that because you don't wanna serve the sheep. You want to use them. This isn't about using your gifts to help us. It's about using us to fulfill your insecurity. And that's not what leadership's for. God can't bless that. He will oppose the proud. But for many of us, that fear is real. Even now you're going, no, Ben, you don't understand. In my workplace, at my friendship group, in my world, I need to get control because I'm trying to get to a place and there's people blocking me. And Ben, you don't understand. If I humble myself and serve others, I won't be able to grab authority. And I have to grab authority because if I don't, I'm in imminent danger of not getting what I want. Well, when you think that way, you're missing something important. And that's why he moves on. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so at the proper time, he may exalt you. When we look and say, my boss is holding me down, that person's holding me down, these things are holding me down, we're losing someone in the equation, the Almighty God. And it says, if you try to run this world, that means you're telling God to scoot over. And that's not how this works. There are things for you to do, but God runs this show. Don't cut him out of the equation. There's a mighty God who leads us. This only makes sense, this idea of humbling myself, if you believe God exists. And what I love about this is he doesn't just say, humble yourselves under Almighty God, or under God. He says, under the mighty hand of God. And what I love about that is that's used so many times in the book of Exodus. It's used all throughout Exodus to talk about God's mighty salvation of his people. They were enslaved in Egypt, and God broke the back of Pharaoh, separated the ocean, moved his people out, and set them into a nation. That God mightily moved to rescue his people from jeopardy into life, and he did it his way. So all through the Old Testament, passages like Deuteronomy 3 say, oh, Lord God, you've only begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand. For what God is like you in heaven or on earth who can do such works and mighty acts as yours. Deuteronomy 4, has any God ever attempted to go take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation by trials and signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great deeds of terror, all of which the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? They're like, no one's even conceived of this. So Deuteronomy 5, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. You can rest. Why? Because the mighty hand of God is leading you. Right? This mentality only works if you believe in a God who exists. And it's fascinating. If you read the book of Exodus, it's embarrassing when you read the book of Exodus and you see these people rescued, the nation of Israel, out of slavery, out of Egypt, brought to the promised land, and as they're moving through the desert, what happens? God parted the Red Sea, set them loose, they get out, and 3 days later, there's no water. And what happens? As soon as there's no water, God let us out here to die. We're going to die of dehydration. How dare you? Let's rebel against Moses. Let's kill them all. And you're like, guys, stop. Stop. Do you think God saved you in order to kill you from dehydration? Or do you think the same God that took out Egypt can provide for you now? And God provides the water, and then a couple days later they get hungry, and they're like, I'm hungry, there's no one driving, give me the wheel, kill Moses. And they totally lose their minds. And God has to say, you think you're gonna stop? I gave you water, set you free from Egypt. Stop doing this, you're acting crazy. Your anxiety is this grip for authority. It betrays an arrogance. You think you can run this show better than me. And we look at them and we read this and do Bible studies and we're like, oh, those silly Israelites. The God who saved you can provide for you. So don't be anxious about what you're going to eat and what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear. The Gentiles do that. It sounds just like what Jesus says to us. God saved you. Jesus Christ entered history, took on sin on the cross, buried it in the grave, rose victorious, rescued you. So sin and shame is your past, not your present, not your future, that you have hope and life. You are a child of God in Jesus' name, both now and forever. So don't be worried about, is my boss going to notice me? Because if he doesn't, I won't get the money I want, so I won't be significant. Stop. There's a mighty God, and that mighty hand is leading you. That doesn't mean there's nothing for you to do. Moses confronted Pharaoh when Pharaoh was wrong. Moses led the people. Moses had to solve problems. There's things we do, but we don't try to grab the wheel from God. We do our part, and we trust him to do his. That's what it means to humble yourself. I don't need to pretend that I should drive. I think he knows better than me. So the question becomes really a faith question. Do I believe God exists? Do I believe there's a God? And if I believe God exists, do I believe he acts in history? If you don't, then freak out and go for yours. Get all you can before you die, right? But if you say, no, I believe there's a God who made all this, and I believe he is leading human history, if you believe that, that's your liberty from anxiety. Then I can humble myself. Then I can trust him to drive this thing. Do I believe God is strong enough to take care of me and supply what I need? And not only strong enough, do I believe he's wise enough that at the proper time, he may exalt you? That's the other time we freak out. We want something, and then we get mad about the timing, so we want to take control. But we can trust God even with that. Do I believe he's wise enough? Some of us are like, well, I'm going to be married so mad, so I know this guy's a loser, but I'm going to marry him because he's the best I got. No. Remember what Garth Brooks taught us. Some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. Some of us are gripping for something we know we need, and God's going, hey, it's not the proper time. Trust me, I know your needs. Let me provide my way, my timing. My kids. Dad, can I have a snack? No. It's because you're a monster, you want us to die, you don't know what's going on, I'm gonna starve to death. No, it's because I'm making dinner right now. You don't know that because you lack perspective. But I'm cooking things that are nutritious, you'll be eating within the hour. I have a better understanding of what your body needs than you do. So let me do my job, you do your job, and we're gonna thrive here. Do you believe God's strong enough to take care of you? Do you believe he's wise enough to know when? And do you believe he's loving enough to want to? That's the last thing. Casting your anxieties on him because he cares for you. This is the one a lot of people struggle with. Do I believe God exists and moves in history? Sure. Do I believe he's wise enough to know how to run the planet? Yes. Although we don't functionally live like that, we ask on a quiz, yes, we believe God is powerful and wise. Do you believe he cares about you? Do you believe he cares about the things you're going through? I love the way this is written, just if I can nerd out about the Greek. It literally says, to him, it matters about you. You believe that? The mighty God who is wise enough to know when and how to exalt you, it matters to him about you. What you're going through matters. That might be my favorite part about this passage is he's not shaming this community for feeling stressed. He's not shaming them for their anxiety, like, oh, get over it, stuff it down, eat your feelings, get it done. He's not doing that. He's saying, hey, no, you're in the midst of things that are really stressful, really overwhelming. I don't want you to pretend like they're not. I want you to cast them onto me. I want you to see that you have an alternative. You have a mighty God who is strong enough to take care of you, wise enough to know when and how, and loving enough to want to. I want you to access that. When you understand that kind of power is at your disposal, you can be a non-anxious presence in the world. You can be something different in your office. You're not striving for power. You can humbly serve people. And let me just point out, if you're working in an office, the people who will most likely get elevated are not the ones that are desperately seeking power. Desperation smells. But the people who are comfortable with God running the universe and say, but these are the gifts and opportunities he gave me. I'm gonna use my gifts to serve other people. You wanna bless someone like that. That person rises faster. What do you do with the anxiety? I cast it on him because he cares, because I believe he's looking out for me, right? That's what we're meant to do. I release my fear because I have a strong and a wise and a loving God. That's how we deal with anxiety. I release it to him. I've said this many times in here, that that's, for me, a daily exercise of waking up in the morning and then just asking myself, how do you feel? And often, I'm worried about the things of the day. But I don't beat myself up about that. I don't shame myself about that. I cast those cares onto him because I know those shoulders are strong. I can trust him. I want you to live by faith. We're invited to. And the remedy for many of our anxieties is to release our need for control and to actually look up and see, no, there's an Almighty. And if I'm humbly under the Almighty, I get liberty from my anxiety, right? The alternative is dangerous. And this is the back part. He says, be sober-minded and be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced from your brotherhood around the world. If you don't, cast your anxiety on the Lord and trust him that in due time he'll exalt you, you will be influenced by other voices. And spiritually speaking, if you don't trust the Almighty, you have an adversary that's waiting for you to separate and become vulnerable. We like to think that we're autonomous people. Well, I make my own decisions. I make my own choices. No one rules me. I define me. And you're like, okay, yeah, I think everything from what we wear to what we listen to is influenced by outside voices. We are not as autonomous as we think, right? We are influenced. And what it's saying here is you're either going to follow a Lord who wants to exalt you, or you're gonna follow an enemy who wants to devour you. As Bob Dylan said, you're gonna serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're gonna serve somebody. We're not as autonomous as we think. We're Pinocchio. From the movie, I don't know about the book. The book Pinocchio is kind of weird. He kills Jiminy Cricket early. You ever read the book? It's bizarre. Let's go with the Disney version. In the movie, what happens? Pinocchio's Wonderful little boy, born to a loving dad, right, that tells him you're going to go to school. Why? So you can learn about the world. Why? So you can be someone that knows how to navigate it. His dad trying to give him wisdom and knowledge to move in a way that exalts him. I want you to trust me, go to school. And he calls him to do that. But what happens as he starts to walk to school, he encounters Honest John. And Honest John says, no, school's for losers. You go be an actor. You can get a bunch of fame and money and do that instead. And here's innocent little Pinocchio. There's different voices speaking. You're going to serve somebody. And he says, yeah, I'll do that. And so he goes and joins this show. And what does he sing? I got no strings to hold me down. You're like, yes, you do. Because look at you being influenced by a bunch of psychos. And everything goes wrong. So he's singing, I got no strings. You're like, oh, yes, you do. You're being completely controlled by voices that don't care about your well-being. And what looks like freedom, power, and money actually becomes slavery. And he gets locked up in a cage. Little Jiminy Cricket comes to the rescue because he's still alive in the movie. They get him out. He goes back home. And then what happens? Goes home, and the next day, he leaves the house, and Honest John's waiting for him and says, hey, man, the acting gig didn't work out. Doesn't work for everybody. Moved back from LA. It's great. I got some other options for you. Let's go to Pleasure Island. Let's just indulge every sensual desire you have. And so he takes him to Pleasure Island. You're in control. What do you feel like doing? Let's do that. Let's indulge these things. And as he indulges that, he doesn't realize, hey, Pleasure Island looks like it's giving you all you want. But as you dwell there, what happens? You slowly become a donkey, and then they enslave you in the salt mines. What looked like liberty becomes slavery. So a little wooden boy, a blockhead, becomes a jackass and a slave. That's the story of Pinocchio. And how is he saved? Only by going down into the depths and rising through sacrifice is he made new and a real boy. Where do these conversion stories come from? How do they do it in Disney? But for many of us, we're the same. We're going to serve somebody. We're going to be influenced by somebody. And if we're not trusting the Lord, I'm humbly saying, I'm going to give my anxiety to you, and I'm going to excel at the revealed things of loving you and using my gifts. I'm not going to freak out and grab control. I'm going to trust that you're in control. I'm going to be humble under the Almighty. I'm going to trust your mighty hand. I'm going to be free from anxiety to serve with humility because I trust God. You're either going to do that or you're going to say, no, it's all about me. I got to go for mine. No one's looking out for me. And you'll start to run over people, and you look out because as you isolate from the community, you are vulnerable to an adversary. He's prowling around to devour you. It's interesting. I remember years ago, I was a youth pastor, and we decided to film a movie video for our church. And they said, hey, we want to do this kind of video. I'll save all the details about it. The video ended up with me in a burlap sack at the zoo. That's all that matters right now. And they were taking videos of me with the animals in a burlap sack. Fascinating, because I went in the petting zoo, and as soon as I walked in, the sheep and goats separated immediately. And the goats surrounded me and the sheep fled. I'm like, there seems to be a verse about this. But we call the goat side being the bad side. I'm not sure what to make about all this. It was very weird. And I remember I would walk past the zebras, and when I walked past the zebra, they would buck. Then I would walk around and walk back, and they would buck again. I'd walk around, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on with these things. And someone finally told me, well, they probably think you're a feed bag. You're just a walking, moving feed bag. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And so then we walked over into this middle place where all the monkeys were and birds, and suddenly, as we walked into that area, they all went crazy. Monkeys screaming, shaking their heads, shaking everything, birds squawking, jumping up and down. I'm like, what is going on? Man, it's crazy at the zoo today. And I look around, I'm like, what is happening? And then I look behind me, and there's the lion. And the lion saw the living, moving, chewing feed bag. And he got up, and he looked at me, and he just began to pace like this. And he put his face right up against the glass, and he was pacing, looking at me, and it was like the whole jungle could feel it. This lion sees a snack, and as they did, all this energy is reverberating through these monkeys and birds, and they're all freaking out. And I was standing there going like, I wonder what's happening at the zoo today. And the zookeeper's like, it's you, moving feed bag. Get out of here, you're in danger. And for many of us, we have a spiritual enemy who wants to devour you, destroy you. And we're like, well, it sure is loud in the zoo today. You're like, hey, man, be sober, be watchful. Your enemy prowls around. Be sober means don't be drunk. But what do you do when you get drunk? You're trying to numb intolerable feelings. I don't want to feel certain things. I don't want to think about certain things that happen to me. I don't want to process potential consequences of the decisions I'm about to make. And so I numb myself to the world because I don't want to deal with things that scare me, that I'm out of control. But as you do that, you often put yourself in a place that doesn't solve your problems, but creates new ones. And here in the gospel, it says, no, be sober, be aware, be watchful. Don't numb the realities around you spiritually, that there's a God in heaven and an enemy below. They're influencing you. Be sober, be watchful, because your enemy does not have your best interest in mind. He wants to devour you. I had a buddy who's kind of a country dude, so I can't do justice to the way he would explain this, but he was like, I'll tell you right now. He said, if you were on your way out of this church, and he said, and we told you in the foyer, hey, there's a lion in the parking lot, and he's looking for you. And so he's prowling around, and he's got your number, man. Look out. And I know some of you are like, man, that story's so crazy. It's fake. There's no parking lots in D.C. Just try to imagine if I came to you and said, hey, leaving church today, there's a lion out there on the streets, and he's looking for you, man. He's got your scent, picked it up, he's coming for you. He's like, you would not leave the church in the same way. You wouldn't be like, okay, we'll see you later. I'm off to brunch. No, you'd be at the door like, what? What? Seriously? Does someone call somebody? Like, can anyone see him? Like, somebody help me. This is crazy. This isn't right. This is not. And you would feel all this tension about, no, I'm in danger. And Peter's like, yeah, that's you spiritually. That you have a God in heaven that wants you to trust him, so in due time he can exalt you. And you have an enemy that's trying to get you to distrust God, go your own way, because it'll look like freedom but ends in slavery. You're going to serve somebody, either a God that will exalt you in due time or an enemy that'll devour you. And so it says in this side, no, you got to resist him. How do you resist the devil? Well, you get some holy water and you splash it on your house. No, that's not in this text. What does it say here? Resist him firm in your faith. When the enemy came to Jesus, he didn't come with a sword, didn't come with a bunch of goblins. He came with deception. Your God's not feeding you. Your God's not providing for you. You need to walk away. You need to go for years. You need to take control. You need to drive. Your father didn't have your best interest in mind. You take control. No one bosses you. You're the king. And Jesus said, no, I'm trusting him. That I release my fears and I stand firm in my faith. What does stand firm in my faith mean? It means I trust the way you've made the world. I trust you know how to move within it, and I'm moving with you. My son is in MMA, mixed martial arts. And in MMA, when he first got in, kid 7, so excited about being in MMA. I mean, it's very exciting for him. He's got so much energy in his body that he shows up there, he's got a little white belt, which means I know nothing. But when they get there on wrestling day, they're very polite the way they do it. You shake hands with the kid, you bow to each other, and then you're gonna have this little controlled wrestling match. And the first time, my son just dominated out of just sheer, passionate, ignorant energy. They were like wrestling, he was like, "Aah!" And like just this poor, helpless child, had no idea what was going on, and my son just ruled. And so he walked out that day and he was like, Dad, I'm amazing at MMA. Like, I've already mastered it. And I'm like, nope. You mastered some poor, unsuspecting child, but no. So the next time they put him in there, they put him with a green belt. Get a couple belts above. Not as big as Owen, but I could see an Owen. He's like, I got this. Say my name. I live in Washington, D.C. I run this town. You know, like he's got all that energy. And then the next thing you know, boom, boom, he's in some kind of lock. He doesn't know. The guy's got his arm back here, head up here, kid's flipping him in circles, spinning him on his finger. My son's like, what is happening? And he just gets totally owned. I was like, what happened was, you don't know anything. You don't know how to actually wrestle. You don't know actual jujitsu. This kid has learned from his teacher how to move, and so he can move you. And you were so ignorant, you didn't even know how ignorant you were. But now a little bit of pain has showed you your ignorance of wrestling and your ignorance about your ignorance just getting in a way. Hey, suddenly you got to go, I need a teacher. I need someone to teach me. I don't know how to navigate the space. I'm in danger here. I'm a walking victim among these green belts. Someone teach me a chokehold. And it's the same here. You have a spiritual enemy. Doesn't mean you got to freak out, but what it means is I got a teacher. I need someone to show me. I'm vulnerable in this environment. Somebody tell me how to move. Tell me where to put my arm. Tell me where to put my leg. Tell me how to walk. Show me how to live. Show me how to walk. I'm going to release my fears to you, God, and then I'm going to stand firm in faith, meaning I'm going to trust you. I'm going to obey you. I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to believe you. I'm going to move with your community. Why? Because the brotherhood's all going through this. Pain is a common denominator in the human story. We often feel like our pain isolates us. But here he says, the whole brotherhood's suffering. The enemy wants to isolate you. But all of us struggle. You don't pull away from the people of God in that moment. You move towards us. I release my fears. I'm going to walk by faith with the people of faith, knowing we're all suffering, but ultimately we'll be vindicated. That even though we're suffering now as a brotherhood, after we suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who's called us to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. I love that. Those are God's responses to us, and it's a cascade of verbs that are all basically synonyms. That God is going to give you grace. God is going to lift you up. God is going to strengthen you internally. God's going to plant your feet. You may suffer for a little while, but you're leading to glory on the other side. That our job in this text, what do? I clothe myself with humility towards each other. I humble myself before the Lord. I cast my anxieties on him. I'm sober-minded and watchful. I'm firm in my faith, knowing I'm not alone. What does God do? He opposes the proud, gives grace to the humble, exalts me, cares for me, and after a little while, he will restore, confirm, and strengthen and establish me. I do my part, and I trust him to do his. That as I trust him, he cares for me. And on the other end of this suffering, there is glory, as I release fear and walk by faith. Last thing, there's a movie, Passion of the Christ. Many of you have seen it. It's a difficult movie to watch because it's Jesus just being brutalized and tortured and then crucified. But it's fascinating when you watch that movie, there's all kinds of human opponents. Pilate that convicts him, the Jewish leadership that reviles him even while he's being crucified, Roman soldiers that drive in the nails, his disciples fearful and scatter. And yet it's interesting for Jesus, he never lashes out at those people. They're not the real issue. But I love the way they did it in the movie. They show you there's a spiritual battle behind all these physical realities. And they have a depiction of the devil that's beautiful and terrifying, that's alluring and disturbing. And you're meant to see that's the real battle. That in the midst of all this pain and suffering, Jesus could leave. The invitation of the enemy is don't trust God. Go your own way. Look out for you. Forget this. Don't serve God. Don't serve them. You go your own way. You protect you. And the battle Jesus wins is saying, no, I'm not going to grab the wheel. I'm not going to take control. I'm not going to go for mine. I'm going to trust my soul to him who judges justly. And I'm going to do good for them. I'm going to pray for those who persecute me. I'm going to speak the truth to Pilate, even if he doesn't want to hear it, but I'm going to trust that God guides my story, and I will live under the mighty hand of God. And you see Jesus suffer for a little while, but in the end arrive in glory. And what I love about that here is he tells us you will suffer for a little while, but the end is in glory. But he's telling you, I'm not asking you to do anything that Jesus didn't already do for you. That your God is not just telling you what to do, he's showing you. Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane cast his fears on the Lord. Then he stood up and walked by faith into that trial. And then he continued to trust the Lord and obey him, firm in his faith, forgiving his enemies, praying for those who persecuted him, blessing those who had scattered from him while he was being crucified. And he suffered for a little while. But then he was buried and he rose, strengthened, encouraged, exalted, glorified. And God tells us if you're with him, you're with him. You may go through suffering, but continue to trust him. Cast your fear on him. Walk by faith, and there's glory on the other side. God is calling us to something great. Will we trust him? The world needs to see a non-anxious church. They need to see that we actually believe there's a mighty hand guiding me. And when they see it, they'll want it. When they see our humility, when they see our willingness to serve, when they see that we're not dominated by fear but by faith, they're going to want to know this God. This is part of God's plan, that as we walk through suffering well, we see those come with us into glory.